What would you do if you secretly regained your hearing and overheard your fiancée speaking ill of you? Gail Navarro, a powerful businessman from Tijuana, lived through this exact nightmare when he pretended to still be deaf to discover who truly loved him. What he heard from his fiancée shattered him, but what he heard from his humble housemaid changed his life forever. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss this incredible story. The rain pounded against the windshield of Gail Navarro's silver Bentley as he returned from Tijuana's most exclusive charity gala. At 35, he was the owner of one of Mexico's most prominent construction companies, and that night he had closed the deal of his life. The city lights blurred through the window as he adjusted the radio volume, listening to financial news announcing the success of his latest investments. His phone rang, displaying the name of his fiancée Marcella, but he decided not to answer. He wanted to get home and tell her in person about the multi-million-dollar contract he had just signed. The traffic light turned green, and he accelerated down the main avenue, unaware that those would be the last sounds he would hear for a long time. Suddenly, the blinding lights of a truck running a red light overwhelmed him. The impact was devastating. The world became a chaotic mix of twisted metal and shattered glass. The last thing he remembered was the deafening sound of the crash before everything went black. 3 days later, Gail woke up in Tijuana General Hospital, surrounded by machines and cables. His head throbbed with unbearable pain. His left arm was in a cast, and multiple bandages covered his torso. Marcella sat by his bedside, her eyes red from crying, holding his hand as she spoke to him. Gail could see her lips moving, but he heard absolutely nothing. He tried to speak, but the words came out distorted, as if he were a stranger in his own body. Panic gripped him as he realized the silence wasn't temporary. Dr. Ramirez entered the room with a grave expression, his lips moving without Gail understanding a single word. Marcella covered her mouth, clearly receiving devastating news. Gail knew, without needing to hear, that his life had just changed forever. The doctor's expression said it all. He had completely lost his hearing. The following days were a nightmare of silence and adaptation. Gail had to learn to communicate through gestures and writing, feeling as though he had fallen into a deep pit from which he couldn't escape. Marcella tried to comfort him, but he noticed a certain impatience in her gestures when she had to repeat things in writing. The doctors explained through diagrams that the trauma had severely damaged his inner ear, and the chances of regaining his hearing were minimal. His business empire would now have to be managed through interpreters and assistants, a humiliation he never imagined he'd face. Business meetings became frustrating pantomimes where he, once the master of every conversation, now depended entirely on others to understand what was happening. The man who had once controlled millions of pesos with a single phone call now struggled to order his breakfast in the hospital. The irony was cruel. He had built his fortune by listening to every detail, every opportunity, every threat. Now, he would have to navigate the world in complete silence. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, Gail faced a reality that terrified him more than any financial crisis. His mansion in the hills of Tijuana, once filled with music, conversations, and the bustle of business, now felt like a cold, empty mausoleum. Marcella had hired a housemaid to assist him in his new condition, a young, humble woman named Livia Suarez. She was about 28, with dark brown hair tied in a simple ponytail, and a warm gaze that radiated a kindness Gail hadn't felt in a long time. Unlike Marcella, who seemed uncomfortable with his new limitation, Livia communicated with him naturally and patiently. She wrote clear messages in a notebook, smiled with genuine compassion, and never showed pity or frustration. She even left small notes with words of encouragement in places he would find them. Her presence began to bring unexpected peace to Gail's chaotic life. However, the nights were the hardest for the businessman. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering the sounds he had lost, the laughter of friends, the bustle of the office, even the simple ticking of his grandfather's clock. Marcella slept beside him, but he felt more alone than ever, trapped in a silent world that seemed foreign. During the day, he feigned strength, maintaining his elegant posture and steady gaze, but in the privacy of his room, tears fell uncontrollably. He wondered if Marcella truly loved him now that he was different, if his high society friends still admired him, or if his business empire would survive without his direct leadership. Livia, who worked late organizing the house, sometimes found him awake and left him a cup of hot tea with a note saying, "Everything will be okay, Mr. Gale." Those small acts of humanity became the only moments of hope in his new reality. But what Gale didn't know was that his world was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The first months after the accident tested Gale's patience and pride in ways he had never experienced. In public, he maintained composure as a successful businessman, dressed in elegant suits and walking with his usual confidence. However, every business meeting had become an exhausting theater where he relied entirely on interpreters to understand conversations. His business partners, who once suspected him for his sharpness and quick decision-making, now looked at him with a barely concealed mix of pity and impatience. During meetings, Gale noticed people talking among themselves without bothering to include him, assuming you wouldn't notice their deliberate exclusions. Marcella accompanied him to social events, radiant in her designer dresses, but he sensed tension in her smile when she had to repeatedly explain his condition. Tijuana's high society, which once welcomed them as a golden couple, now treated them with forced courtesy that Gale could feel without hearing the words. His reputation as a powerful, untouchable man was slowly crumbling. In the privacy of his mansion, the dynamics had changed drastically, and Gale found himself navigating entirely new territory. Marcella, once the glamorous girlfriend who adorned his arm at parties, now had to take on responsibilities that clearly made her uncomfortable. She had to handle important calls, translate conversations, and be constantly available to help him communicate. Her patience wore thin quickly, especially when Gale needed clarifications on complex business matters. In contrast, Livia had developed a natural and fluid communication system with him, anticipating his needs without making him feel like a burden. She prepared meals exactly as he liked them, organized his home office for comfortable work, and always had paper and pen ready for urgent communication. While Marcella sighed in frustration every time she had to repeat something, Livia never showed him patience, even when he needed multiple explanations about household matters. The difference in their attitudes was so stark that Gale began to notice details he had previously overlooked. Daily routines had become complicated in ways Gale had never considered. Mornings began with Livia gently waking him by touching his shoulder, as he couldn't hear the alarm, and preparing a breakfast he ate in complete silence while reviewing financial newspapers. Marcella usually slept in, claiming the previous nights had been stressful attending to her fiancé's special needs. During family meals, conversation was practically non-existent, with Marcella writing basic comments about the weather or social plans, while Livia communicated through expressive gestures and affectionate notes that included details about her day or small observations that made him smile. In the afternoons, when Gale tried to work from home, Marcella often went shopping or met with friends, leaving him alone with Livia, who quietly organized his workspace and brought him coffee without him asking. These small attentions began to create a sense of comfort and understanding that sharply contrasted with the tension he felt when Marcella was present. Weekends revealed even more cracks in his relationship with Marcella and his growing emotional dependence on Livia. Marcella insisted on maintaining their social commitments, dragging him to dinners and events where he felt like a silent spectator in his own life. She spoke for him, decided for him, and presented him as an object of pity requiring special care. At these events, Gale noticed people's eyes awkwardly shifting when he tried to join conversations, and Marcella quickly intervened to facilitate communication. However, when they returned home, it was Livia who greeted him with a genuine smile, asking through notes how his night had been and showing real interest in his responses. On Sunday afternoons, while Marcella got her nails done or talked on the phone with friends, Livia and he developed a silent ritual of working together in the mansion's garden. She watered the plants while he read, and they occasionally exchanged smiles and gestures that felt more intimate than any conversation he'd had with Marcella in months. The mask of normalcy Gale maintained in public grew heavier, especially as he realized the people closest to him treated him in vastly different ways. Marcella had started making important decisions without consulting him, assuming his condition made him less capable of handling complex matters. She canceled meetings in his name, declined social invitations without asking him, and spoke of him as if he were a child needing constant protection. His business friends, who once sought his advice and partnerships, now rarely contacted him directly, preferring to speak with Marcella about anything related to him. In contrast, Livia treated him exactly as she had from the first day, with respect, dignity, and genuine consideration for his opinions and feelings. When he wrote long notes explaining his frustrations or concerns, she read them thoroughly and responded with thoughtful comments that showed she truly understood his words. During lonely nights, when Marcella went out with friends claiming she needed a break, Gale found himself seeking Livia's quiet company as she worked nearby, creating an atmosphere of peace he hadn't felt since before the accident. But what he didn't know was that he would soon have the chance to hear exactly what both women truly thought of him. 6 months after living in silence, Dr. Ramirez called Gale for a routine checkup that would change his entire world. In his elegant private office at Angela's hospital, the ENT specialist reviewed the latest tests with an expression of surprise Gale hadn't seen before. Through gestures and diagrams, the doctor explained that the inflammation in his inner ear had significantly decreased, and there was a possibility of recovering some hearing through an experimental procedure. Gale felt as if he'd been given a second chance at life, but the doctor was clear. The treatment required multiple neurotherapy sessions and specific medications, with no guarantee of full success. Yet, there was something in the doctor's eyes that gave him hope, a professional confidence he hadn't seen in months. Marcella, who accompanied him to the appointment, showed controlled excitement, immediately asking about the cost and duration of the treatment. Livia, who had come along as additional support, simply smiled with tears in her eyes, taking Gale's hands in a gesture of genuine happiness. The drive home was silent, but filled with a renewed hope he hadn't felt in months. The treatment began immediately, with sessions 3 times a week at a specialized clinic in Tijuana. Gale received corticosteroid injections directly into his eardrum, a painful procedure that started showing results after the 3rd week. First came strange buzzing sounds, like someone tuning an old radio. Then, distorted sound that gradually became clearer. Marcella accompanied him to some sessions, but constantly complained about the time they took and the uncomfortable medical environment. In contrast, Livia never missed an appointment, patiently waiting in the reception area during the 2-hour procedures. Dr. Ramirez monitored each step of progress with hearing tests that showed slow but steady improvement. By the 5th week, Gale heard his own voice for the first time in months, an experience so thrilling he cried uncontrollably. The doctor's words began reaching his ears as distant whispers, but they were real sounds, not the absolute silence he'd grown accustomed to. Marcella celebrated the news with a smile that seemed more relieved than genuinely happy. However, Livia crossed herself and murmured a prayer of gratitude that Gale could faintly hear, filling him with indescribable emotion. By the end of the 8th week, Gale had recovered about 70% of his hearing, enough to hold normal conversations and hear everyday sounds clearly. Dr. Ramirez explained it was the best outcome he'd seen in similar cases, but warned that he'd need to continue medications and maintenance therapies. The news should have been cause for immediate celebration, but something inside Gale made him pause and reflect deeply. During his months of silence, he had observed behaviors, gestures, and attitudes he'd never noticed before, especially the stark differences between Marcella and Livia. Now that he could hear again, he had a unique opportunity to discover what people really thought of him when they believed he couldn't hear them. An idea began to form in his mind. What if he pretended to still be deaf to uncover the truth about those around him? Curiosity and a growing intuition about Marcella's true intentions led him to make a decision that would change his life forever. That night, after much reflection, he decided to keep his hearing recovery a secret. Hiding his improvement was easier than he'd imagined, as everyone around him was used to communicating through gestures and writing. Gale continued responding the same way, pretending not to hear sounds that now reached his ears clearly. During family meals, he maintained the same focused expression while reading lips, though he could now hear every word spoken around him. Marcella noticed no change in his behavior, continuing her routine of writing basic messages and talking on the phone in his presence as if he couldn't hear her. Livia also suspected nothing, continuing her infinite patience with notes and affectionate gestures. Dr. Ramirez agreed to keep the medical secret when Gale explained he needed time to process his new reality before sharing it with his family. The first weeks of this deception were emotionally exhausting, but Gale knew he was about to uncover truths that would change his perspective. The sound of the world had returned to his life, and now he would use them as a tool to discover who truly loved him. Over the next 2 weeks, Gale perfected a routine to maintain his deaf facade while observing and listening to everything around him. In the mornings, when Marcella thought he was asleep, he overheard her phone conversations from bed, pretending to be unconscious as she spoke freely. During the day, he sat in his study pretending to read work documents, but was actually attuned to every conversation in the house. Livia continued her household duties, occasionally humming soft Mexican melodies that Gale could now fully enjoy, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. Conversations between Marcella and her friends when they visited became especially revealing, as they spoke freely, assuming he couldn't hear. Their discussions about parties, shopping, and social gossip included casual references to Gale's situation that began to unsettle him. The businessman realized he had been living in a bubble of silence that had hidden painful truths about his social circle. However, he also began hearing small details about Livia that filled him with unexpected warmth. Her morning prayers thanking God for the chance to help a good person, her phone conversations with her mother where she spoke fondly of her work. What he was about to hear that night would change his heart forever. The night of Thursday, March 20th, became the most revealing and painful moment in Gale's life since the accident. Marcella had returned late from a dinner with her social club friends, clearly irritated and slightly drunk. Gale pretended to sleep in bed as she entered, talking on the phone with her best friend, Valeria, without bothering to lower her voice, believing he couldn't hear her. "I can't take this situation anymore," Marcella said, kicking off her high heels with abrupt movements. "Living with a useless man who can't even hold a normal conversation is driving me crazy." Gale felt as if a knife had pierced his chest, but he remained still, breathing deeply to control the emotions flooding him. Marcella continued, "My friends ask me why I'm still with him, and what am I supposed to say? That I'm going to marry a deaf man who depends on me for everything." Her voice carried a tone of contempt Gale had never heard before, as if she were talking about an annoying object rather than the person she loved. The next words were even more devastating. "If it weren't for all the inheritance and properties, I would have left months ago." The conversation went on as Marcella undressed and prepared for bed, revealing a side of her personality that shattered any romantic illusions Gale might have held. "The worst part is that now everyone looks at us with pity at parties," she complained, removing the diamond earrings he had given her for her birthday. "We're no longer the envied couple we used to be. Now we're the example of what nobody wants to happen to them." Gale listened to every word with a mix of pain and a strange sense of liberation, as if he were finally seeing Marcella without the filters of blind love. "Valeria, I swear, some days I feel like screaming at him to get a nurse and let me live my life," she continued, aggressively applying facial cream in front of the mirror. "But the lawyer explained that if I leave him now, before the wedding, I won't be entitled to any of his fortune." The coldness with which she spoke about financial calculations while he lay a few feet away, pretending to sleep, revealed the true nature of the woman he had planned to spend his life with. Her love had been a financial investment, not a genuine feeling. The most hurtful comments came when Marcella began mocking his physical condition and how it had affected her social life. "Do you remember how he used to be? So confident, controlling every conversation, the center of attention at every event," she said with a bitter laugh that chilled his blood. "Now he's like a ghost I drag everywhere, nodding and smiling like a fool, because he doesn't understand anything around him." Gale felt each word like a slap, but he also began to realize that the woman lying next to him was a complete stranger. "My parents asked me when we're going to set a wedding date, and I don't know what to tell them. How do I explain that I don't want to marry someone who'll be a burden for life?" The phone conversation stretched on for nearly an hour, during which Marcella vented complaints, frustrations, and plans that included no genuine love for him. She spoke about maintaining the relationship only until she could find an elegant way out, preferably after securing some financial compensation. The most painful moment came when Marcella cruelly compared him to other men in their social circle, particularly Roberto Mendoza, a divorced businessman who had been flirting with her at recent events. "Roberto knows how to treat a woman, Val," she sighed as she finally lay in bed. "Last week, he sent me flowers just because. No special occasion. And when we talk, he looks me in the eyes, really listens, not like Gail, who just nods without understanding anything. Gail had to summon superhuman effort not to confront her in that moment, keeping his breathing steady as she continued tearing apart any happy memories they might have shared. Roberto invited me to spend the weekend at his house in Ensenada, and I told him I'd think about it. What do you think? The casual way she considered infidelity while he lay beside her, pretending to sleep, showed that their relationship had been a lie long before the accident. Marcella wasn't just planning to abandon him because of his condition. She was already evaluating replacement options with chilling coldness. The conversation ended with her making plans to meet Roberto the following week, supposedly to talk business, as she would tell Gail. When Marcella finally hung up and fell asleep, Gail stayed awake all night, processing the devastating reality he'd uncovered. The woman sleeping beside him, who would smile and write affectionate notes in the morning, had just revealed that she considered him a useless burden and was planning to betray him in the vilest way possible. Every fake caress, every forced smile, every "I love you" whispered in recent months had been an act to maintain access to the fortune he had built through years of hard work. Yet, amidst his pain, Gail also felt a strange sense of clarity and freedom, as if he had finally awakened from a confusing dream. He now knew exactly who Marcella Villaseñor was, an ambitious and scrupulous woman who saw his misfortune as a financial opportunity rather than a chance to show true love. The tears that fell that night were both from the pain of betrayal and relief at discovering the truth before making the biggest mistake of his life. But what he didn't know was that the next day, he would hear words that would heal his broken heart in a way he never imagined. The morning after the devastating discovery about Marcella, Gail woke with a mix of pain and determination he had never felt before. He went through his usual routine, getting up slowly and heading to the bathroom while Marcella still slept, pretending to be as dependent as ever. Livia was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Softly humming a song he could now hear with perfect clarity, a melody that brought inexplicable peace after the emotional storm of the previous night. When she saw him enter, she smiled with her usual genuine warmth and wrote in her notebook, "Good morning, Mr. Gale. How did you sleep?" He responded with gestures, as he had for months, but for the first time, he paid full attention to every detail of her behavior. Livia had a special way of moving through the kitchen with a natural grace that had nothing to do with artificial elegance, but stemmed from an authentic beauty that radiated from within. As she prepared huevos rancheros exactly how he liked them, Gail noticed how she ensured everything was perfect, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care that painfully contrasted with Marcella's cold performance. Like the video if you're enjoying the story to support our channel. Marcella came down to breakfast an hour later, looking impeccable but with a forced smile Gail now recognized as completely fake. "Good morning, my love," she said, giving him a kiss on the cheek that felt like ice on his skin. She wrote in the notebook, "How are you feeling today? You look like you didn't sleep well." But her eyes showed no real concern, only the mechanical fulfillment of a role she had been playing for months. During breakfast, Marcella casually mentioned she had a meeting with clients that afternoon to review wedding dress catalogs, a lie Gail immediately recognized after overhearing her real plans the previous night. Livia served coffee with silent movements, but Gail noticed her eyes shifting uncomfortably whenever Marcella mentioned the wedding. There was something in the housemaid's expression that suggested she, too, had noticed inconsistencies in the fiancé's behavior, though out of respect and discretion, she never commented. The tension at the table was palpable, though only Gail could fully perceive it, caught between Marcella's performance and Livia's silent authenticity. When Marcella excused herself to get ready, leaving him alone with Livia, the atmosphere immediately became warmer and more natural. That afternoon brought the moment that would forever change Gail's perspective on true love. Marcella had gone out, supposedly for her work meeting, but Gail knew she was actually meeting Roberto Mendoza. Around 4 p.m., she returned home with her friend Valeria and another woman Gail didn't know, the three of them laughing and talking loudly as they entered the main living room. He was in his study, pretending to read work documents, but he could hear every word clearly. "The truth is, I'm tired of the situation," Marcella said, pouring glasses of wine for her friends. "I can't keep carrying this responsibility that isn't mine." Valeria responded with a cruel laugh. "Oh, Marcella, But think of all the money you'll inherit when you marry him. It's worth putting up with a few more years. The third woman, apparently new to the group, asked, "But seriously, he doesn't hear anything? Can we talk freely?" Marcella replied with contempt, "Nothing. He's completely deaf. It's like having an expensive piece of furniture in the house." The laughter that followed felt like stabs to Gale, but what came next was even worse. The conversation escalated to levels of cruelty Gale never imagined possible from a woman who claimed to love him. "The worst part is I have to pretend to care, writing him little romantic notes, going to his boring therapies," Marcella complained, pacing the living room with her wine glass. "Before it was fun to be with him, but now it's like taking care of a big child who doesn't understand anything." Valeria added, "At least you have that girl, Olivia, who takes care of most things." Marcella scoffed with disdain. "That Indian thinks she's some kind of saint, always so attentive to him like he's something special. It makes me sick how she looks at him, like she pities him or something worse." Gale's blood boiled when he heard her refer to Olivia with racist terms, revealing even more of her true character. "The truth is," Marcella continued, "sometimes I think she's in love with him, the poor fool. As if someone like Gale would ever notice a housemaid." The laughter echoed through the house, but at that moment, something extraordinary happened. Olivia appeared at the living room door, having overheard the last comments. What followed was a display of courage and dignity that Gale would never forget. Olivia, still in her apron with cheeks flushed from indignation, stood firmly in front of Marcella with a resolve that surprised everyone present. "Excuse me, Mrs. Marcella, but I can't stay silent after hearing that," she said with a trembling but determined voice. "Mr. Gale is a good, generous, and noble man who doesn't deserve to be spoken of like that by anyone, especially not by someone who claims to love him." Marcella, stunned by the interruption, tried to intimidate her. "How dare you meddle in conversations that don't concern you? You're just a maid." But Olivia didn't back down. "I may be a maid, but I'm also a woman with dignity, and I won't allow you to talk about a person I admire and respect like that." Her words resonated through the house with a force Gale had never heard in his defense. "Mr. Gale is worth more than all of us combined, not for his money, but for his heart. And any woman who can't see that doesn't deserve to be by his side." The silence that followed was deafening, but Olivia wasn't done. "If you can't value the wonderful man in front of you, the problem isn't him, it's you." At that moment, Gale's heart pounded so loudly he thought everyone could hear it. Olivia's brave words echoed in Gale's mind for days, like a beautiful melody he couldn't stop hearing. Never in his life had someone defended him with such passion and sincerity, especially someone with nothing to gain from it. Marcella was so furious after the confrontation that she locked herself in her room for hours, refusing to speak to anyone and threatening to fire Olivia immediately. However, Gale intervened, writing a firm note, "Olivia stays." No discussion. Marcella reluctantly agreed, but from then on, the atmosphere in the house became even more tense and artificial. During meals, Marcella barely spoke to Olivia, treating her with a coldness that bordered on open hostility. In contrast, Gale began to see his housemaid with entirely new eyes, noticing details he had overlooked in his world of silence and self-pity. The way Olivia moved through the house with natural grace, how her eyes sparkled when she smiled genuinely, and especially how she had risked her job to defend him without expecting anything in return. It was as if he'd been blind to her inner and outer beauty during all those months of recovery. The following days became a constant revelation of Olivia's extraordinary personality, which Gale had completely underestimated. In the mornings, as she prepared breakfast, he could now hear the traditional Mexican songs she sang softly while working, melodies filled with hope and faith that warmed the kitchen in stark contrast to the coldness Marcella brought to the house. Olivia had a beautiful voice, sweet yet strong, perfectly reflecting her character, gentle on the surface but with unbreakable strength beneath. When she spoke to her mother on the phone on Sundays, Gale overheard conversations filled with familial love, respect, and genuine values that reminded him of what truly mattered in life. "Mom, I'm okay. Work is calm, and Mr. Gale is a very good person," she said with a tenderness that touched something deep in the businessman's heart. In those conversations, she also mentioned her dreams. studying nursing to help more people, saving every peso to send her younger brother to university, and always ending with gratitude to God for having work and health. The humility and nobility of her aspirations contrasted sharply with the superficial, materialistic ambitions he now recognized in Marcella. Gail's transformation wasn't just mental, but profoundly physical and emotional. He began to eagerly anticipate the moments when Olivia entered his study to clean or bring coffee, pretending to focus on documents while secretly watching her every move with growing fascination. Her way of folding clothes was meticulous but unpretentious. Her manner of arranging books showed genuine respect for knowledge, and when she thought he wasn't watching, she occasionally paused to read the titles with intellectual curiosity. One afternoon, Gail caught her discreetly flipping through one of his Mexican history books with a look of concentration he found incredibly attractive. When she realized he'd seen her, she blushed and wrote a note apologizing. "Sorry, Mr. Gale, I love to read, but I didn't want to touch your things without permission." He wrote back, "You can borrow any book you're interested in." The grateful smile he received lit up his entire day. In the afternoons, when she worked in the garden watering the plants, Gale found himself inventing excuses to go out to the terrace just to watch her, admiring how she spoke softly to the flowers as if they were living beings deserving of care. The contrast between the two women became clearer every day, especially during the difficult moments Gale still faced in his social readjustment. When he had follow-up medical appointments, Marcella usually found excuses not to go, citing social commitments or beauty appointments she deemed more important. On those occasions, Livia volunteered to accompany him, waiting patiently during consultations and showing genuine interest in his progress. After appointments, Marcel would ask mechanically, "How did it go?" without expecting a detailed response, while Livia took the time to read his notes about what the doctor said and ask specific questions that showed she truly cared about his well-being. During tough nights, when Gail had nightmares about the accident or felt overwhelmed by frustration, Marcella simply complained that his movements woke her and moved to the guest room. In contrast, Livia seemed to have a sixth sense for his moments of distress, appearing quietly with a cup of chamomile tea and a note saying things like, "Tomorrow will be a better day," or "God has beautiful plans for you." These small gestures of genuine understanding began to heal wounds in Gail's heart he didn't even know he had. The final epiphany came on a rainy April night, when Gail realized he had been looking for love in the wrong place for years. Marcella had gone out to dinner with friends, probably lying about her plans again, and he was in the library reading, listening to the soothing sound of rain against the windows. Livia came in to collect the teacups she had served that afternoon, and when she thought he wasn't watching, she stopped in front of the large family portrait on the wall, a photo of Gail with his parents taken before the accident, where he looked happy and full of life. She gazed at it for several minutes with an expression of infinite tenderness and murmured softly, "What a beautiful man, my God. Someday he'll smile like that again." At that moment, Gail understood he had fallen deeply in love with a woman who loved him not for what he had, but for who he was at his core. Livia saw qualities in him that even Marcella hadn't recognized when he was at the peak of his success, and she had been willing to risk everything to defend him when he needed it most. The love growing in his chest was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not the superficial attraction he had felt for Marcella, but profound recognition that he had found his soulmate in the most unexpected person. That night, Gale made the bravest decision of his life. He would tell the truth about his hearing, no matter the consequences. The perfect opportunity for the confession came 3 days later during a thunderstorm that struck Tijuana with unusual intensity for the season. Marcella had traveled to Guadalajara, supposedly for a fashion exhibition, but Gail knew from her phone conversations that she was actually spending a romantic weekend with Roberto Mendoza. The irony wasn't lost on him. While his fiancée openly betrayed him, he was about to confess the most important truth of his life to the woman he truly loved. Lightning illuminated the mansion at irregular intervals, creating a dramatic atmosphere that seemed tailor-made for this pivotal moment. Livia was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Gail heard her soft footsteps moving carefully to find candles and flashlights, and her sweet voice murmuring, "Don't worry, Mr. Gale, I'll bring light soon." It was incredible how, even in the dark, she thought of his well-being before her own. The businessman knew this was a moment he had been waiting for, when they would be completely alone without distractions for the most important conversation of their lives. When Livia returned to the dining room with several lit candles, her face glowed with an angelic beauty that took Gale's breath away. The golden light of the flames danced in her brown eyes, creating sparkles that seemed to reflect the purity of her soul. "Mr. Gale, I found these candles in the pantry," she wrote in her notebook with careful handwriting. "The power should come back soon, but we can eat like this for now. Is that okay?" He nodded, but for the first time in months, didn't respond immediately with gestures. Instead, he stared at her with an intensity that made her blush slightly. Livia set the table with graceful movements, arranging plates and cutlery with the same care she put into every detail of her work. During dinner, they conversed as they always had, she writing questions about his day, he responding with signs. But there was something different in the air, an emotional tension both could feel without explaining. Thunder rumbled outside, but inside the candlelit house, an intimacy had formed that Gale had never experienced. It was as if the outside world had vanished, leaving them alone in a bubble of warm light where only the two of them existed. After dinner, as Livia cleared the plates, Gale made a decision that he knew would change everything between them forever. He approached her and gently touched her arm to get her attention. When she turned, he spoke aloud for the first time in her presence since the accident. "Livia, I need to tell you something very important." The look of absolute shock on her face was indescribable. The plates in her hands nearly felt the floor. "Mr. Gale, you can hear," she whispered with a trembling voice, as if she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. He nodded slowly, feeling tears welling in his eyes. "I can hear, Livia. I regained my hearing weeks ago, but I decided to keep it secret." Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears of joy and confusion. "But why? Why didn't you tell us?" The question he had been dreading came with all the innocence and honesty that defined Livia. And Gale knew he had to be completely honest about his reasons, no matter how painful it was to explain what he had discovered about Marcella. The conversation that followed was the most honest and emotional Gale had ever had in his adult life. "I needed to know who really loved me for who I am, not for what I have," he explained as they sat together on the living room sofa, the candles creating an intimate, confessional atmosphere. "During these months of apparent silence, I heard things that opened my eyes about the people around me." Livia listened with complete attention, her eyes fixed on him with a mix of understanding and concern. "I heard Marcella talking on the phone with her friends. Livia, I found out she's only with me for the money, that she considers me a useless burden, that she's planning to leave me as soon as she finds a way to do it without losing the inheritance." Tears streamed down Livia's cheeks as he spoke, not out of sadness for him, but out of indignation at the cruelties he had endured. "But I also heard something wonderful," Gale continued, moving closer to her. "I heard you defending me with a courage I've never seen in anyone. I heard you speak of me with affection when you thought I couldn't hear. I heard you pray for my well-being, sing to brighten the house, and treat me with a dignity my own fiancée never gave me." The silence that followed was profound, charged with emotions both had been suppressing for months. The climactic moment of the confession came when Gale finally found the courage to express what he had been feeling since the night she defended him. "Livia," he said, gently taking her hands in his, "during these months, you've been my light in the darkness, my hope when everything seemed lost. I've watched you, I've listened to you, and I've fallen in love with you in a way I never thought possible." She looked at him with tear-filled eyes, her breath catching with emotion. "Mr. Gale, I don't know what to say." Her voice trembled with a mix of joy and fear. "I've always felt something special for you, but I never dared to think you could see me that way." Her words came from her heart with disarming honesty. "I'm just a housemaid. You're an important, wealthy, educated man." Gale gently interrupted her. "You are the most noble, courageous, and beautiful woman I've ever met. Your heart is worth more than all the titles and fortunes in the world." In that moment, under the golden candlelight with the storm as their witness, they both knew they had crossed a line that would change their lives forever. "I love you, Livia," he said with a certainty he had never felt before. And I believe you love me too. She nodded through her tears. Yes, I love you, Mr. Gale. I've loved you for a long time. But what they didn't know was that their happiness was about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. On Monday morning, Marcella returned from her trip with Roberto Mendoza in a foul mood, clearly frustrated that her seduction plans hadn't gone as expected. Gale resumed pretending to be deaf to avoid premature confrontations, but now that he confessed his love to Livia, maintaining the facade became even more emotionally challenging. During breakfast, Marcella wrote curt messages about how boring the fashion exhibition had been and how disappointing the business contacts she had supposedly gone to meet were. However, Gale noticed something different in her behavior, a nervous tension he hadn't seen before, as if she were scrutinizing his every move with suspicion. Livia served coffee with her usual elegance, but there was a special sparkle in her eyes that only Gale could interpret, the reflection of the secret love they now shared. Throughout the week, they managed to communicate through knowing glances and subtle gestures that went unnoticed by Marcella, but created an emotional intimacy that filled Gale with a happiness he hadn't felt in years. However, Marcella began asking strained questions about his routine, therapy schedules, and especially the time he spent alone with Livia. Her paranoia intensified over the following days as she started noticing details she had previously overlooked. She saw how Gale smiled more often when Livia was around, how his eyes followed her as she moved through the room, and how he responded more animatedly to her notes compared to hers. "There's something weird going on here," she told Valeria over the phone one afternoon, while Gale pretended to read in his study, though he heard every word. Gale's acting different, more alive, somehow, and that made his acting strange too, like she knows something I don't. Valeria suggested she might be imagining things due to the stress of managing the situation, but Marcella wasn't convinced. She began implementing small tests, speaking loudly when she thought he wasn't paying attention, dropping objects suddenly to see if he reacted to the noise, even playing music at high volume without warning him in writing. Gale had to use all his willpower not to react to these provocations, maintaining his deaf act while feeling the tension in the house grow. However, the love he now shared with Livia gave him the strength to endure Marcella's increasing hostility. The breaking point came on Friday night, when Marcella decided to discreetly hire a private investigator to monitor the house during her absence. She had invented another business trip, but actually stayed at a nearby hotel to coordinate the spying operation. The investigator, a man named Fernando Ruiz, installed hidden cameras in the common areas of the house and audio recording devices in strategic locations. His mission was to document any suspicious behavior between Gale and Livia that could confirm Marcella's instinctive suspicions. During the weekend, while Marcella was supposedly away, Gale and Livia shared moments of emotional intimacy that were fully captured by the surveillance devices. They were seen talking normally, with him speaking and her responding, something that completely contradicted the official story of his deafness. The recordings also documented conversations where he expressed his love for her, and she responded with tenderness and devotion. By Sunday night, Marcella had irrefutable evidence that Gale had been faking his deafness and, worse from her perspective, that he had fallen in love with a housemaid. The betrayal she felt wasn't from a broken heart, but from the humiliation of being deceived and the threat this posed to her financial plans. On Monday morning, Marcella returned to the house with a carefully crafted plan to confront Gale in the most dramatic and publicly humiliating way possible. She had invited several of her high society friends to breakfast, including Valeria, Elena Morales, and Carmen Vega, all wives of prominent Tijuana businessmen who were part of the city's most exclusive social circle. She also casually invited Roberto Mendoza, presenting him as a potential business partner who wanted to meet Gale to discuss investment opportunities. The table was elegantly set in the main dining room with the finest china and floral arrangements that gave the appearance of celebration, when in reality, it was a cruel ambush. When Gale came down to breakfast, feigning surprise at the number of guests, Marcella greeted him with a smile that chilled his blood. "Good morning, my love," she said loudly in front of everyone, simultaneously writing in a notebook. "We have special guests today. I hope you don't mind." Livia served coffee with nervous movements, clearly uncomfortable with the presence of so many people and the tense atmosphere that seemed to have settled in the room. Gale instinctively knew something terrible was about to happen, but he had no idea how prepared Marcella was to destroy his world in front of witnesses. The explosive revelation came just after the first course, when Marcella stood up with a glass of champagne in her hand and a diabolical smile on her face. "Dear friends," she announced in a clear, loud voice, "I have a wonderful surprise to share with you. Guess what? My dear fiancé has been keeping an incredible secret." All eyes turned to her with curiosity, including Gale's, who began to feel a knot in his stomach. It turns out our dear Gale is no longer deaf. He fully recovered his hearing weeks ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone's eyes shifted to Gale with expressions of confusion and shock. But the most interesting part, Marcella continued with calculated cruelty, is that he decided to keep it a secret so he could eavesdrop on all our private conversations. She then pulled a manila envelope from her purse and began spreading photographs and transcripts of the recordings across the table. And, of course, to seduce the housemaid without anyone noticing. The photographs clearly showed Gale speaking normally with Livia, intimate moments violated by the cruelest invasion of privacy. Roberto Mendoza feigned surprise, but Gale noticed his act wasn't very convincing. Livia, who had been serving at that moment, dropped the coffee tray, creating a crash that echoed to the dining room, her eyes filling with tears of humiliation. The moment had arrived. Gale could no longer pretend, and would have to face the consequences of his decisions in front of Tijuana's high society. The silence following Marcella's revelation was so thick it could be cut with a knife. But Gale knew the time had come for the most important truth of his life. He stood slowly, with a dignity that surprised everyone present, and looked directly into the eyes of each person at the table. "It's true," he said in a clear, firm voice, without a trace of the shame Marcella had hoped to provoke. "I regained my hearing several weeks ago and chose to keep it secret." The guests exchanged looks of confusion and curiosity, but Gale continued with a calm that sharply contrasted with Marcella's emotional agitation. "I did it because I need to find out who truly loved me for who I am, not for what I have." His gaze turned specifically to Marcella, who began to pale as she realized her plan to humiliate him might backfire. During these months of apparent deafness, I heard conversations that opened my eyes to the true nature of some people who claimed to love me. Roberto Mendoza shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly understanding where the conversation was headed. Livia stood by the kitchen door, tears streaming down her cheeks but her head held high, ready to face any consequences of their love. The direct confrontation with Marcella was inevitable and devastatingly honest, exposing truths that left her completely vulnerable in front of her own friends. "Marcella," Gale said, addressing her with chilling serenity, "I heard every cruel word you said about me on the phone with Valeria. I heard you call me useless, complain about having to carry me, and especially how you plan to leave me as soon as you found an elegant way to do it without losing inheritance." Marcella's eyes filled with panic as her friend's accusing gazes turned toward her. "I also heard about your romantic plans with Roberto here, the trips you took together while I thought you were at fashion exhibitions." Roberto tried to stand and leave, but Gale stopped with a look that could have melted steel. "Stay, Roberto. After all, you're an important part of the story." Valeria and the other women began murmuring among themselves, clearly shocked by the revelations about their friend. "The most painful thing," Gale continued, "wasn't discovering that you didn't love me, but realizing you never truly loved me. Even before the accident, I was just a status symbol to you." Marcella tried to defend herself. "Gale, you don't understand." But he cut her off firmly. "I understand perfectly. I understand that I'm fortunate to have discovered your true nature before marrying you." The most powerful moment of the confrontation came when Gale publicly defended his love for Livia in front of the entire high society present. "Yes, I fell in love with Livia," he declared without shame, turning to her with a smile radiating genuine love. "I fell in love with a woman who saw me as a human being when I doubted my own worth. A woman who defended me with courage when all of you looked at me with pity." Livia lifted her head with pride, wiping her tears but maintaining her dignity. "I fell in love with someone who never asked for anything in return, who cared for me without expecting reward, who sang to brighten my home and prayed for my well-being when she thought no one was listening. The women present began to look uncomfortable, some clearly moved by the sincerity of his words. Elena Morales murmured, "I've never heard a man speak about a woman like that." Carmen Vega nodded, casting a disdainful glance at Marcella. "Livia is worth more than any woman in our society." Gail continued, "because her heart is pure, her love is genuine, and her courage is unbreakable. If that seems scandalous to you, the problem isn't mine. It's a society that values money over character." Marcella, desperate to regain control, shouted, "She's a housemaid. You can't humiliate yourself like this." Gail looked at her with pity. "The only person who has humiliated herself here is you, Marcella, with your greed, your betrayal, and your complete lack of dignity." The definitive break came with a symbolic gesture that would resonate in Tijuana's social circles for years. Gail approached Marcella, who stood frozen with shock and anger, and extended his hand. "Give me the ring," he said with a firmness that brooked no argument. "What ring?" she asked, her voice trembling, though she knew exactly what he meant. "The engagement ring I gave you when I thought you loved me. You no longer have the right to wear it." With shaking hands, Marcella removed the 5-carat diamond ring, the symbol of their planned marriage. When she handed it to him, Gail took it and walked straight to Livia, who looked at him with eyes full of joyful disbelief. "Livia Suarez," he said, kneeling before her as the guests watched in astonishment. "Will you be my wife? Not because I have money, but because you have the most beautiful heart I've ever known." The silence lasted several seconds until Livia responded, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Gail. Yes, I want to be your wife." Spontaneous applause from Elena and Carmen surprised everyone, followed by an ovation that filled the dining room. Marcella fled the house, followed by Roberto and Valeria, but her escape only confirmed the cowardice of her character. The true friends remained to celebrate the authentic love they had just witnessed. The rest of the morning turned into an impromptu celebration no one had expected, but felt more genuine than any lavish party they had ever attended. Elena Morales, always the group's harshest critic, was the first to approach Livia with genuine warmth. "My dear, any woman who could inspire such love in a man is an extraordinary woman." Carmen added, "We've witnessed something very special today. True love like this doesn't come along every day." Even some of the other women, initially shocked by the events, began conversing naturally with Livia, discovering her intelligence, natural grace, and genuine kindness. Gail watched these interactions with deep satisfaction, seeing the woman he loved finally recognize the qualities he had admired for months. As the guests gradually left, each bid farewell to the new couple with sincere blessings and promises of support. The house, once a stage for so much falsehood and pain, was filled for the first time in a long time with genuine laughter and hopeful conversations. Roberto Mendoza never returned, and it was later learned he had fled the city that night, apparently in debt to several creditors who had been financing his lifestyle. Gail and Livia had gained more than love. They had earned respect, admiration, and, above all, the freedom to live their truth without masks or lies. 6 months after that memorable day, Tijuana Sacred Heart Church was filled with joy so pure it seemed to touch the heavens. Gail and Livia had chosen to celebrate their wedding in a simple but meaningful way, inviting only the people who truly mattered in their lives. Livia's mother, Dona Rosa, had come from Oaxaca wearing a navy blue dress her daughter had bought especially for the occasion, tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle. Livia's younger brother, Miguel, now a university student thanks to Gail's financial support, served as the best man, his pride evident in every gesture. Elena Morales and Carmen Vega sat in the front row, having developed a genuine friendship with Livia during the months of wedding preparations. Dr. Ramirez was also present, smiling with the satisfaction of having played an indirect role in this love story. The church, decorated with traditional Mexican flowers like marigolds and red roses, created an atmosphere celebrating both love and the cultural roots Livia had brought into Gail's life. As the bells rang, signaling the start of the ceremony, everyone present knew they were witnessing something extraordinary and authentic. Livia walked down the aisle on the arm of Don Pedro, a family friend who acted as her father for the ceremony, wearing a simple but elegant wedding dress that highlighted her natural beauty without unnecessary embellishments. Gail, waiting by the priest, couldn't hold back tears as she approached, recalling the journey that had brought them from that first morning when she arrived to work at his house to this moment of absolute happiness. The vows they exchanged were written by themselves, words straight from the heart without pretension or empty formalities. "Livia," Gail said clearly, "you gave me back not only my hearing but the ability to listen to my own heart. You taught me that true love doesn't make noise. It shows itself in silence, day after day, through small but meaningful actions." Livia responded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Gail, you taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by what they have, but by who they are. With you, I learned that love knows no social differences, only hearts that recognize and love each other unconditionally." When the priest renounced them husband and wife, their kiss was accompanied by applause and joyful tears that filled every corner of the church. The celebration continued at the Hilltop Mansion, transformed for the occasion into a space reflecting the new life Gail and Livia had built together. The gardens Livia had lovingly tended during her time as a housemaid now bloomed with an exuberance that seemed to celebrate their love. The party was intimate but filled with genuine joy, with mariachi music filling the air with traditional Mexican melodies that had everyone dancing. Dona Rosa enjoyed herself like a child, dancing with Don Pedro, and sharing stories from Livia's childhood that made everyone laugh. Miguel, Livia's brother, gave an emotional speech thanking Gail for changing not only his sister's life, but their entire families, allowing him to study and pursue his dream of becoming an engineer. Elena and Carmen, now Livia's best friends, organized traditional games and ensured every moment was memorable. During dinner, Gail announced the creation of a foundation to help underprivileged youth access higher education, a project they would run together, reflecting their shared values of helping those in need. The most emotional moment came when Gail asked all the guests to gather in the main living room for a special announcement. "Dear friends," he began, holding Livia's hand, "a year ago, I lost something I thought was fundamental to my life, my hearing, but God had better plans for me." His voice broke slightly with emotion. "By losing my hearing, I gained the ability to truly see people, to distinguish between true love and falsehood. I found in Livia not only the woman of my life, but my soulmate, my partner, my inspiration to be a better person every day." Livia blushed as everyone applauded, but Gail wasn't finished. "Today, I want to announce that we're expecting our first child." The explosion of joy was immediate, with hugs, tears of happiness, and congratulations that seemed endless. Dona Rosa was the first to embrace her daughter, whispering prayers of gratitude for all the blessings that had come to their family. Dr. Ramirez joked that he had never seen a medical case with such a happy ending. As the celebration continued into the early hours, Gail and Livia took a moment alone on the balcony, looking at Tijuana's twinkling lights below, knowing they had found something more valuable than all the world's treasures, an authentic love that had overcome every test. As for Marcela, high society rumors said she had tried to marry Roberto Mendoza, but he had fled, leaving her with considerable debts and a ruined reputation. She had to sell her jewelry and move to a modest neighborhood, working as a saleswoman in a city boutique. Occasionally, Gail and Livia would see her at social events, but they felt no resentment. Her betrayal had been a disguised gift that led them to their true destiny. In the end, they learned that silence is sometimes necessary to hear the heart's voice. This story teaches us that true love always finds its way, that honesty is the foundation of every authentic relationship, and that sometimes our greatest losses become our greatest blessings. Gail and Livia remind us that a person's worth is not measured by their social status or bank account, but by the purity of their heart and the nobility of their actions. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with someone special. May God bless your life with authentic love and illuminate your path with wisdom. Until the next story. This translation maintains a narrative flow and emotional depth of the original text while ensuring clarity and natural expression in English.